which is just down south of the Tilenga. This is the map that has these black lines that you see, and that is the 1,900 line kilometers of seismic data that exists. And the red lines is the proposed, or the data that is being undertaken. That is the 150 line kilometers of 2D seismic. I'll briefly take you through what seismic means so that we can all understand why we are here and why we must acquire seismic data. So basically, seismic is just comprised of a set of key stages that are intended to ensure that we map the subsurface by sending sound waves through the explosives that we are going to set. And these sound waves are reflected back to the surface, or the echoes, so that we draw the picture of what is in the subsurface. When we look at the extreme, we are seeing these lines. These are layers in the subsurface of rocks and soil, if I could use that term, so that we use to interpret. So just like a doctor uses sound waves to do an ultrasound to see what is inside our bodies, geoscientists use sound waves to see what is in the subsurface without necessarily drilling it. So that is basically a picture that we use to interpret what is beneath the subsurface. And we use that as geologists, geophysicists, to be able to interpret, to find the rock units of interest, to be able to find oil and gas that we look out for. Briefly to this project particular and the processes that are involved, what we see here is a reflection of this track. So we use dynamites to be able to inject sound into the subsurface. The dynamites, the sound goes back into the ground and is bounced back, reflected to the surface, and we use receivers, we call them geophones, and they receive these sound waves or echoes, which we go to the computers to be able to transmit it into the picture that we have. The dynamites we are using are very light, or small charges, about 2 kilograms, which is meant for this work, and it's buried in the ground about 9 meters in the underground, intended to ensure we protect the environment and also create the contact within the subsurface. The geophones that we have used are laid on the surface with cables. If we have time, we'll be able to see the line just a few meters from here, but it's a line and we receive these. And then we receive it into this track so that we are able to see the signals or the short points that we have. So this picture is basically a picture showing the line clearance. So before we do anything, we have to do the clearance, permitting, and surveying of the lines to determine the positions for the short points where we're going to drill and put the sources, and also to be able to determine where we will put the receivers. This track is a drilling track that we use to drill the 8-meter short holes where we are inserting the dynamites. And this is a bunker where we received a certificate from the UPDF that we will use to store the dynamites within that, following the guidelines that are provided. So in brief, that is what is happening here. My name is Loida Chichoncho. I am the head of exploration and new ventures at the Uganda National Oil Company. Today is a very special day in the life and the history of Uganda National Oil Company as the operator of the Kasuruban contract area. That Unoc is a 100% shareholder, and we are pleased to be launching the first seismic activity that is going to be undertaken by the Uganda National Oil Company. The Kasuruban contract area, Unoc signed a production sharing agreement for it with the government of Uganda in February 2023, and we were granted an exploration license to undertake petroleum exploration activities within the block. This block is reasonably big and covers an area of approximately 1,285 square kilometers, and it covers parts of the lake and also parts of the land. It's critical for us to be very careful as we do the work that we do, because it lies part of it in the national park, but also the communities that we operate with. So what is this seismic activity that we are carrying out? The seismic activity is one of the activities that are undertaken to be able to enhance the understanding of the petroleum prospectivity of an exploration area. And what happens is that sound waves are introduced into the ground. Then these waves are reflected back, or they bounce back, and these reflections echoes are recorded on the surface using sophisticated tools, and then they are processed to be able to have a map or draw a map or a picture of the subsurface. Just like I said, it's like how a doctor uses sound waves to see what is within our bodies without necessarily opening it. Also, the seismic activity, as geoscientists, we use sound waves to be able to see what is in the subsurface without necessarily digging or even drilling. So that's what we have. And what do we use when we are doing seismic activity? We use energy sources, and in our case here we are using explosives, where we dig a hole in the ground, introduce the energy sources, we detonate them, and then the sound waves hit the layers of the subsurface and they are reflected back to the surface. We use geophones as receivers, and when we receive them on the ground, we are able to transmit them into the computer system to be able to draw a picture of the subsurface. So of course it involves different activities. We start with survey design to determine where we want to acquire this data. We look at the parameters, for example, line spacing. We look at parameters such as receiver and source intervals. Then we go out and survey these lines. What you see here on the board, we see that these survey lines are being surveyed and mapped to be able to have the short points to introduce in the sources that we want. Then we drill holes. What you see as a track over there, we are looking at the holes that have been drilled to plant the dynamite, which we later detonate, and we're able to introduce the sound waves. So in terms of the process, we are basically looking at a picture of the subsurface layers in the ground, which we interpret as geoscientists to be able to see what is beneath the subsurface or under the ground, so that we are able to determine where oil or gas or other minerals of interest are located. Thank you.
Assuming with this activity, we hope to see more oil production in the area.
Our expectation is to be able to enhance the understanding of what is in the ground. What we know is that when we map these structures, we are able to determine what is contained in these structures. We could have more, we could have less, but we get a better understanding of what lies in the subsurface.
Okay,
thank you.
Offshore meaning on the lake. And of course, it's also seated within 3 districts of Hoima, Bulisa, and Masindi. And Unoc holds 100% participating interest of this block today. So for us, signing the petroleum production sharing agreement marks a very significant milestone for Unoc in our journey to become an operator, similar to what we saw with China National Offshore Oil Corporation or Total Energies or other operators that we know globally. But as a national oil company, it's also a cardinal or national role to play in the upstream petroleum value chain to ensure sustainability of reserves in the country. Of course, when we saw Tilenga, now we saw Kingfisher, now we are going to see Tilenga, all the barrels that were talked about are going to be depleted at a certain point. So it's our obligation as a national oil company to ensure that we replenish what is going to be produced. So therefore, we will use this exploration license where we are today as a strategic vehicle to develop our technical capacity to independently operate petroleum exploration licenses, and also ensure that we maximize national content. Now, most times we forget that actually the first imprint or footprint of national content in the oil and gas sector is the intentionality that government made to establish Unoc. Because sometimes people forget that Unoc is Ugandan, but we are also Ugandans participating in the oil and gas sector. So I'm happy that at least as a national oil company, we've successfully implemented the work obligations for this block for the first exploration period since we acquired the license, and that supported the minister to grant us an extension through the second exploration period, which we are currently undertaking. So far, what we have on this block, the Kasuruban block, is 1,909 kilometers of 2D seismic data. And I want to, I think, correct Mukondo. When he came here, he said we are going to witness a shooting exercise. Just to be clear, we are not going to be shooting anything else, but we are going to be shooting seismic. Just so that we are clear the actual. And he talked about explosives as well. So let's be clear that we are shooting seismic data. So we have also been able to acquire some geophysical and geological data, but that's on top of some of the work that had been done before. There are some wells that were drilled here before on the block, and several reports that had been made on the block. But the interpretation of the data that had been acquired before, the 2D seismic data, points to 9 prospects, which means those prospects can end up being fields if we do more work, similar to what you've seen in Kingfisher and what we are going to see in Tilenga. And the estimated stock tank oil initially in place for this area, based on the data that we have, is just about 600 million barrels. So as the operator of the contract area where we are today, Unoc is required to conduct day-to-day operations within this license block in fulfillment of the work program obligations that we committed to undertake. And this includes, of course, not only acquiring seismic, but also geophysical and geological data and other technical studies to enhance our understanding of the area so that we can find drillable prospects and improve on the resource base. So the acquisition of the seismic data, which is 159 kilometer 2D seismic data, was part of the minimum work program obligations, which was approved or which we committed to in the production sharing agreement and licenses, and also got approval from the regulator. So to achieve this work program and the minimum work obligation, we contracted BGP, which is a very well-known world leading geophysical solution provider, to undertake this service, operating as Oriental Geophysical Uganda Company Limited, who I think has representation here today. If you can stand up for recognition. So in implementation of this project, we comply with the legal and regulatory framework governing the sector. And in that respect, prior to commencement of the works here, we had to undertake an environmental and social impact assessment, which was approved by NEMA. And we secured that approval prior to implementation. We also secured licenses to store and operate the explosives that Mukondo talked about, again, to be used for seismic acquisition, nothing else, as well as approval from Uganda Wildlife Authority to operate within the game reserve. Here we are in the community area, but the block has an area that is protected as well. So key to success is the, of course, holistic stakeholder engagement that we undertake within the community, plus working closely with other key stakeholders like the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, the National Environment Management Authority, Uganda Wildlife Authority, National Forestry Authority, Uganda Police, the UPDF, the district and local council or local government officials, and the local communities where we operate. And we want to thank all the different stakeholders for supporting us in this endeavor, because it's critical for us as a national oil company to undertake these works. So without getting so much into technical details, which I believe Lloyda should ably come,